Well, this morning I wanted to share with you about not enough. And, usually when we start to think about not enough, our focus goes right there. And beyond this, then it gets to the necessities for life, food, shelter, things of that nature. But I want us to broaden our view a little bit to include those times when we personally feel that we're not enough, that we feel we're personally not enough for the responsibility or the situation that we find ourselves in. Now, the Bible has a lot to share with us about not enough. And there's incredible displays of God's provisions, examples in Old Testament, New Testament. And there's instruction that's still relevant for us today, and so I want us to focus on that. I want to mention in the Old Testament, that 1 Kings 17 and 2 Kings 4, it shows some not enough situations that a couple widows were facing. One was facing famine and was down to the last oil and flour to make a meal. The other one was about to have her sons sold to creditors for the debts that were owed. But God, maybe I should say that again, but God, don't forget those words, but God, and your not enough situation, you want to link that but God with your situation, because in their situation, but God miraculously provided as they faithfully obeyed the instruction of the prophets, being Elijah and Elisha respectively. So before we even start this, we have this common denominator. Remember that in math in school, the common denominators? Faithful obedience. Faithful obedience, that's the common denominator that I want us to take from the Old Testament right to the New as we look at the New Testament example that's recorded in all the Gospels when there was a not enough situation and Jesus met it, 5,000 people out in the middle of nowhere. And I want us to look at the account found in John chapter 6. So I want us to look at verses 4 through 7. Now the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was near. Then Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread that these may eat?" But this he said to test him, for he knew himself what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little. Wow. It's a not enough situation. They're in a place where there isn't any available food, and they haven't got the money to buy it even if there was. A not enough situation. The situation looks impossible. Well, I want us to focus on three essentials that we're going to be looking at in the next few verses that are important for us whenever we face one of these not enough situations. I want us to look at verses 8 and 9. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. But what are they among so many?" That was given to Jesus. That lunch was given to Jesus, was given to him. And that's a truth we need to learn. Give your little to Jesus. And most focus on the situation alone, and we recognize we need to give it to Jesus. 1 Peter 5:7 says, casting all your care on him, upon him, for he cares for you. And I don't happen to have a bulletin with me. I didn't pick one up. Maybe there's one laying here. I don't see one. Someone got one? Yeah. Who'd like to read that? Because I know not everybody in here has one. We're so prone to do this. Who's got a good, strong voice and likes to read? Sure. Yeah, you. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. Okay, Olivia, you share. Read Broken Dreams.
As children bring their broken toys with tears for us to mend, I brought my broken dreams to God because he is my friend. But then instead of leaving him in peace to work alone, I hung around and tried to help with ways that were my own. At last I snatched them back and cried, how can you be so slow? My child, he said, what could I do? You never did let go.
I hoped you could hear that. I won't ask for a show of hands of how many of us give our situation to God, and then we want to tell him how to do it. And then we get frustrated when he doesn't do it in the time frame that we've allotted for it. You know, it's about 35, 40 seconds. But the bottom line is, we don't let go. We don't let go. And the truth of the matter is, if we're really going to surrender to God, there's a whole lot more involved than just letting go of our little not enough situation. We have to have a focus that's more like what Paul describes in 2 Corinthians chapter 8 about the believers in Macedonia. I want us to look at the first 5 verses. Moreover, brethren, we make known to you the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia, that in a great trial of affliction, the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded in the riches of their liberality. For I bear witness that according to their ability, yes, and beyond their ability, they were freely willing, imploring us with much urgency that we would receive the gift and the fellowship of the ministering to the saints. And not only as we had hoped, but they first gave themselves to the Lord and then to us by the will of God. Do you see what? They gave themselves to the Lord. They gave themselves to the Lord first. In the pews, in the songbook, if you happen to look at number 285, there's a song by Isaac Watts. Says that when I survey the wondrous cross, he concludes that song with this stanza or statement: were the whole realm of nature mine, that were a present far too small. Love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all. So the first question was, we're facing something that's not enough. We have to ask, have we given the situation and ourself to Jesus? Have we surrendered it all? Or are we still standing there looking over his shoulder with our hand on the bottom of the project telling him how to do it? Have we surrendered? That's the first thing, is have we surrendered? As we get back to John chapter 6, verse 10 says, then Jesus said, make the people sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in number about 5,000. Sit down. There was an instruction given. It was going to take faithful obedience to that instruction, but what they were doing was they were preparing to receive. They were preparing to receive. That's the same as the Old Testament. Remember that instruction, faithful obedience? Following Jesus is a walk of faith. And if you haven't found this out, you soon will. Following Jesus, there is going to be this continuing and ongoing tension between the obvious fact, this is impossible. This is impossible, and yet the instruction from Jesus is, do it. The instruction from Jesus is, do it. Even though it's impossible, do it, prepare for it. Maybe to help us see this from a little bit different perspective, I want you to watch a clip. It's called St. John in Exile. For those who don't know about it, it's Dean Jones was an actor for Disney back in the 60s, did lots of their movies. What you might not know is that later in life he became a believer. And his change, his conversion was real. He went around to church in the mid-'80s, he went around to churches and he did this stage performance of John in exile as if he's the Apostle John in exile on the island Patmos where John received the revelation. So go ahead and listen to what he shares. Now I know the statement that he made is not going to be found in Scripture, but we need to apply it. That statement he made when he said, the least I could do was cooperate. And I want us to thoughtfully put this in here and how do we respond when Jesus gives a direct instruction that we know is impossible? Do we faithfully obey? Or do we start to have this argument that takes place between our ears and we start telling him all the reasons it won't work? Or we try to inform him of a better way that this could be done? But remember the common denominator to fully receive the blessing of God, it always has been faithful obedience. And in this case, when there's not enough, the faithful obedience that Jesus has taught is simply asking and believing. Remember Jesus' teaching on prayer? And it's truly far too much for us to start to dig down on this morning. But just so you have some places you might reference, you remember in Matthew 6, he said, go to the Father in secret. In Luke 11, he said, ask, seek, and knock. He taught about the persistent widow, not to mention the Lord's Prayer that he taught. Faithful obedience to our not enough is praying and believing. So we have to ask, the next question is, are we preparing to receive by faithful obedience? Or are we still arguing with the fact that it's impossible? The next thing I want us to look at is found in John chapter 6, verses 11 through 14. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise of the fish, as much as they wanted. So when they were filled, he said to his disciples, gather up the fragments that remain, so that nothing is lost. Therefore they gathered up and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which were left over by those who had eaten. Then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, this is truly the prophet who has come into the world. He told them, gather it up so nothing is lost. Well, I want us to, I know that we could make a case about we're to be good stewards and nothing to be lost that way. But I think that this was more about God getting all the glory for what was done, about a preserving of the evidence of what was really done, in the sense that the fact was there was still more left over, far, far more left over than they ever had when they started. 12 baskets full instead of a sack lunch, and everyone that was there had eaten as much as they wanted. Remember in the Old Testament times, Israel was instructed to make memorials about what God had done, like when they crossed Jordan on dry ground, they were to take those river-run rocks and take them up and build pillars. It's so God will continue to get the glory for what he's done. That he's going to continue to get the glory for what he's done. And the Apostle Paul made an emphatic appeal to believers in Rome that I believe is intended for all believers. And I want us to look at what he taught them. It's found in Romans 12, the first 2 verses. And I think this is all about God getting the glory that's due him. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. He says, a living sacrifice. Does anyone else here wonder what that means? What's that look like? Well, I think that Isaac Watts hit the nail on the head in that song when he said, compared to Jesus' sacrifice, all that we could ever have or ever do is not enough. It's going to demand my life, my soul, my all. And since we're not going to be sacrificed a one and done, it's over, we're going to continue living, that means our life is going to involve a lot of little, not enough acts. Maybe to help us ponder what that may or may not involve. We've just looked at John's account of feeding of the 5,000 in John 6. Well, in Luke 9, Luke recorded it, and when he did, when Jesus and Philip were having this conversation about feeding them, Jesus said to him plainly, you give them something to eat. That maybe changes the dynamic a little bit for us, doesn't it? When Jesus said, you give them something to eat. And, maybe some of these not enough events aren't going to be so much about us as about other people that we encounter. And if we're sensitive to the Lord, and I hope and pray that as soon as I say this, some of you could raise your hand and say, yeah, been there, done that. What I'm talking about is you've been there and you're at the grocery line and there's somebody there and they've got all their groceries for their kids or whatever and they don't have enough. So you just pay it. Or you're in a restaurant and you notice people there that the Lord puts it on your heart, they don't have enough. So you pay it. Or you're at the gas station. Or whatever the case may be, and the Lord puts on your heart, they don't have enough. And so you take care of it, unnoticed. You just bless them. And they may never know who blessed them. All I can say is that when you do that, you're going to begin to experience joy that didn't come from you. I want us maybe to help us perceive how big these unnoticed, seemingly meaningless, not enough actions can be. How big can something that's just unnoticed, seemingly mundane, who would ever know, who would ever care? Well, to help us see this, I want us to picture the big picture for a moment if we can. I don't know that any of us living now can really grasp this, but I want you to stop and think about the chaotic conditions of the world in World War II. The overwhelming loss of life, suffering and destruction on an unprecedented scale that I don't think any of us could even really take in. And then as you're looking at that massive chaos that's taking place in Europe and in Asia, what could a few POW laborers do that would make any difference? What could they do? While you're pondering that question, I want to talk to you about Tondeleo's story. And first you have to know that Tondileo was a B-17 bomber flying out of England in July of 1943. There's a 10-man crew, and they're a part of many, but on this day, a massive bombing raid deep into Germany. There's 186 bombers, around 150 fighters, and they're all going on this raid. Now, how many of you have heard the old World War II planes? You've heard them, start them up and fly them. If you ever have, there's one thing that's common to all World War II aircraft. They're loud. They're really loud. Now, try and visualize this. Over 1,000 radial engines flying by you. I mean, you probably heard the Forest Service fire bombers that go by from time to time. Imagine hundreds and hundreds of them. So they're on their way, and as they get to where they're going, or almost get to where they're going, they encounter fierce fighter opposition. And Tondileo, for whatever reason, seems to be getting its fair share of what's happening. Their tail gunner, if you'd put the next picture up, Michael Aruth, he was getting plenty of opportunities, and with the twin 50s in the back of that plane, he'd shot down 2 Messerschmitts, and as they kept swarming in, he soon was wounded, and one of his machine guns was broken by enemy fire. Their plane was riddled. They were losing controls and different things. But even with one gun, he still managed to knock down another Messerschmitt. And by the time they got home, their plane was riddled. And, you know, after those planes get home, the mechanics and the repair crew, they show up and they start to take everything that's broken off and fix the plane so that it'll be ready for another mission if possible. And as they do, they find one of the wing fuel tanks has got 11 undetonated 20 millimeter explosive rounds lodged in various parts of that fuel tank. And in closer inspection, as they take those bullets apart, there's no detonators in them. There's no explosive component. It's empty. They find 10 empty ones. The 11th one has a rolled up note stuck in it. Written in Czechoslovakia, says, "This is all we can do for you now. This is all we can do for you now." Talk about a meaningless, seemingly thing to resist against the prevailing forces of wickedness, the Nazis, to be working for them in their ammunition producing plants, and just silently, as whenever they can, making one ineffective. Is that a miracle in and of itself? No. Did God turn it into one? Well, all the guys that flew home on that plane thought it was. And that's the thing about these times, that we're facing situations that are not enough, or maybe somebody else's not enough situation, and we just silently, anonymously do something. We don't know what God is going to do with that. That's how God gets the glory out of our lives, is us just faithfully doing these things that maybe nobody else on the planet's ever going to be aware of. but we trust that God will use them for His glory. Today's a day that we remember Jesus' atoning sacrifice, that it's more than enough for anything. Between He Himself, who He is, and what He's done is more than enough for anything we will face. And as we remember what He has done for us today, as we worship Him for His sacrifice, His suffering and death, I want us to ask these questions. Have I given the situation and myself to Jesus? Have I surrendered it all to Him? And have I faithfully, obediently responded to the not enough situation that we're facing with prayer and belief? And am I committed to a life of seemingly not enough acts, the ones that possibly nobody else will ever know about, so that God receives all the glory? Are we committed to that? So God bless you, keep you.